Well, greetings. This is Dr. Peter Murano, and today's presentation covers the top 10 things that older adults get wrong when they start strength training. So please join me. You know, most older adults are never taught how strength training should change with age. As a result, many either undertrain, overtrain, recover poorly, use improper form, or unknowingly follow routines that are better suited for younger athletes. In this presentation, I will explain the most common mistakes that we as older adults can make when beginning strength training, and more importantly, why these mistakes matter and how we can fix them. The information presented in this video is intended for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as personal medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Exercise programs should always be individualized, particularly for older adults and individuals with existing medical conditions, orthopedic limitations, cardiovascular concerns, or previous injuries. Always consult your physician or qualified healthcare provider before beginning any new exercise or nutrition program. It is absolutely true that aging changes the rules of training. The body does not respond at 65 or 75 the way it did at 25, and pretending otherwise often leads to not only frustration, but overtraining, injury, and stagnation. Recovery becomes more important as we get older, as does signaling pathways becoming less responsive, and the margin for error becomes smaller in our training. But aging does not eliminate the body's ability to train and to adapt very well, actually. It simply changes the strategy required for that adaptation to occur successfully. At the same time, strength training remains one of the most valuable interventions that is out there. And the reason is it helps preserve muscle mass, bone density, metabolic health, balance, reaction time and capability, and overall independence, which is what we all want. More importantly, it helps maintain the ability to perform ordinary tasks, the so-called activities of daily living, with confidence and dignity. This is why intelligent adaptation matters, and the goal here is not to train recklessly or imitate younger athletes that you see on social media, but to apply the right stimulus for you that is age appropriate at the right time with proper recovery and structure. Smart programming allows older adults to continue improving while respecting the realities of aging physiology. And this is age 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Ultimately, the real goal is capability, not simply appearance, certainly not vanity, not numbers on a scale or even athletic performance alone, but the ability to remain functional and resilient and independent and physically capable throughout the later decades of life. And we'll start with a big one. Failure to warm up properly before you start lifting and strength training. Many older adults treat the warm-up as optional because they associate it with wasted time or assume it is only necessary before an athletic competition. But in reality, aging changes the readiness of the body dramatically. Connective tissue becomes less elastic. Synovial fluid circulation within joints may become less efficient. Nervous system responsiveness slows down, and circulation often requires more gradual activation. Walking into the gym and immediately attempting heavy or forceful movement is biologically very different at age 70 than at age 20. A proper warm-up gradually increases tissue temperature, improves blood flow, lubricates the joints, activates stabilizing muscles, and wakes up neurological recruitment pathways. Just as importantly, it allows movement patterns to become smoother and more coordinated before significant loading begins. And older adults who warm up properly often end up feeling stronger, more stable, less painful, and more confident throughout the entire workout. So this warm-up session is not separate from the workout. It is the nervous system and connective tissue preparation phase. So this one you see in many gyms from time to time, and that is lifting light weights without purpose. And why would someone be lifting light weights? Well, they could be coming off of an injury or a hospitalization, a surgery, an illness, and they're just gradually starting a strength training program perhaps, and they're advanced in years. But anyway, whatever the reason is, they treat light resistance training as little more than repetitive motion. There's no real effort and engagement. So they move the weights very casually, without concentrating, without acceleration, intent, or muscular engagement, almost as though they are simply going through the motions and that's enough. But the nervous system responds strongly with when we are purposeful in our movements, and we treat those weights as if they weigh a lot more than they actually do. And that's a game that we should all play when we lift light weights. Pretend they're heavy and put in the extra effort as if you're moving a lot of weight. Even when relatively light loads are used, attempting to move with controlled force and purposeful muscular activation, which is what I'm talking about here, helps to recruit higher threshold motor units and to preserve type 2 muscle fiber function. And these are things that we've talked about in previous presentations as being extremely important as we age, because we tend to lose the powerful type 2 muscle fibers as we age, and the higher threshold motor units begin to peter out, as the expression goes. So fast twitch fibers and explosive recruitment capacity do decline progressively over time, and if light weights are moved passively during the workout, the nervous system is just not going to respond very much. It's only going to receive a weak stimulus for that response. However, when moderate loads are lifted with concentration, or light loads with posture control, coordinated breathing, and purposeful effort, the body receives a far more meaningful adaptive signal. And I can tell if my clients are moving with purposeful effort or not very easily. The goal is not reckless explosiveness, however, but intentional movement. And muscles respond not only to resistance, but to the quality of nerve or neural recruitment during and that drives that movement. Now this next one, number 3 out of the top 10, I can relate to. You try to train like you are still 25 years old. And I say I can relate to this because when I first started thinking about strength training as an older man, I was 63 years old. And I just grabbed some dumbbells and started going at it, which eventually gave me a bit of pain. I injured my shoulders. So we don't want to make that mistake. Many older adults do, though. They enter the gym carrying the psychological memory of what their bodies used to be like and used to be able to tolerate decades earlier. And unfortunately, biology changes as well as physiology, whether we emotionally accept it or not. We can't will it to not happen. It does happen to everybody. Recovery capacity declines. Connective tissue becomes less forgiving. Joint surfaces accumulate wear and tear. Even sleep quality can change as we get older. And the nervous system may recover more slowly after intense training. That's very common. This does not mean, however, that older adults cannot train hard. We can. It means we no longer ignore, however, recovery biology, and I'll be talking about this. Younger individuals often survive poorly designed training programs because they possess enormous recovery reserve. Unlike us, as older adults, we frequently do not have that. And trying to duplicate the exact loading patterns when lifting weights, the training volume, the training frequency, or get this one, the ego-driven lifting style of youth, you know what that means, often produces joint irritation, excessive fatigue, chronic soreness, and then the big one, injury. When we get injured, we're out of the gym, and it takes much longer to recover. And quite frankly, depending on the nature of the injury, we may never get back into the gym. So that's why we have to train intelligently. And intelligent older training requires understanding that adaptation still remains possible, sometimes remarkably so, but the margin for recovery error becomes much more narrow. So wisdom must increasingly replace youthful exuberance and, I would almost say, recklessness. That brings us to number 4 on our list, and it's somewhat related to the previous. You still chase young man physique goals. Ah, yes. Aging changes what success in training should look like, however. Younger men often pursue aesthetics above all else. Maximal muscle size, visible abs, extreme low body fat and leanness, or competitive appearance goals. And while appearance still matters to many older adults, the deeper goals gradually shift, or they should, toward preserving function, preserving independence, confidence, metabolic health, posture, a big one, balance, reaction capability, and long-term resilience. Ironically, however, many older adults who train intelligently for function end up looking quite impressive physically anyway. But the mindset needs to change. At age 70, being able to climb stairs confidently, recover from a stumble without breaking anything, carry groceries easily, rise from the floor independently. How many people in their mid to late 70s or 80s can do that? And maintain energy throughout the day become biologically far more important than chasing bodybuilding style perfection. Let's think about that seriously. And the healthiest older athletes often understand that longevity itself is now the real performance event that we need to participate in. Training becomes preparation, not merely for appearance, but for maintaining capability across the remaining decades of life. And number 5 now, we're halfway through the top 10. And this is something I talk about at length in my Hard to Kill book, and it's mixing cardio and lifting incorrectly. And when an aerobic workout and a strength training workout are incorrectly mixed, there's an interference effect that actually drove my thinking in the direction of developing the AMPK-mTOR method, quite frankly. But many older adults unknowingly place themselves into what might be called the gray zone of training, and you should look for the presentation that I put together on the gray zone. They combine exhausting cardio and resistance exercise in the same session, without understanding that these activities emphasize different biological systems and recovery demands. Long-duration cardio performed immediately before lifting can leave the nervous system fatigued and reduce force production quality when you start strength training. And excessive cardio after intense lifting may impair recovery and amplify fatigue signals. Both strength training and cardiovascular exercise are valuable, but they are not biologically identical. Resistance training, strength training, emphasizes mechanical tension, muscular recruitment, especially the type 2 muscle fibers, and structural adaptation associated more strongly with mTOR signaling, whereas endurance, aerobic, cardio-oriented work emphasizes energetic stress, mitochondrial demand, type 1 muscle fiber recruitment, and AMPK-related metabolic adaptation. So what we have here, if we constantly blend both into the same session, exhausting session, I would call it, may create competing signals while overwhelming recovery capacity, especially in older adults. This does not mean that the two can never coexist. They can and do very well in younger athletes, but it does mean that exercise organization and recovery become increasingly important with age. Sometimes separating the modalities across days allows clearer signaling and better adaptation, and that really is the backbone of the AMPK mTOR method. And I do say sometimes separating the modalities because it depends on who we're talking about. If it's a 20-year-old, they have a body that is very forgiving in terms of their signaling, and they do not need to have clear signal separation the same way that a 70-year-old or 80-year-old does. Number 6, you either undertrain or you overtrain. Older adults often fall into one of these two extremes. Some become so fearful of injury that they never challenge themselves sufficiently to stimulate meaningful adaptation. Others attempt to prove they are still young by training recklessly hard despite inadequate recovery capacity. Both extremes fail biologically. Undertraining produces too little stimulus to maintain muscle, to maintain bone density, nervous system responsiveness, and metabolic resilience. Overtraining creates chronic fatigue, unresolved inflammation, joint irritation, sleep disruption, and nervous system exhaustion. The body adapts best to properly dosed challenge, followed by sufficient recovery. This concept is central to hormesis. The stress must be meaningful enough to stimulate adaptation, but not so excessive that it overwhelms recovery systems. Older adults must learn to distinguish productive challenge from destructive excess, and intelligent training exists between fear and punishment. I love that. Now this next one, failing to train consistently across weeks and months, I can see that occasionally in clients, but I have definitely seen it in my own training life where I'll train consistently for a number of weeks and then something comes and interrupts that, and the consistency aspect is down the drain and I have to get back into it, and that is a problem. And many older adults still think about exercise in terms of isolated workouts here and there, instead of long-term biological signaling from consistent workouts. In other words, if you have one hard session a month, that's not going to change anything in terms of improvement. Adaptation occurs gradually through repeated exposure across weeks, months, and years. Muscles strengthen through repeated recruitment. Mitochondria adapt through repeated energetic demand. Balance, very important, improves through repeated neurological challenge. Connective tissues adapt through repeated loading and recovery cycles. Sporadic training constantly resets progress. You make a little progress and then you go back to square one. Then you start making progress, but then you fall back again because the body is receiving inconsistent signals. And consistency matters more than an occasional heroic effort in the gym. So don't think you can make up for a lack of consistent training by going all out 2 or 3 times a month. It doesn't work that way. In fact, older adults often benefit more from moderate but sustainable long-term training than from highly aggressive, short-lived routines. That's important. Let it sink in. And the body is responding to repeated patterns, is what we're saying, not to some gigantic effort once in a blue moon. A person who trains intelligently 3 times per week or 2 times per week for 3 years will almost always outperform someone who trains recklessly for 6 weeks and then stops repeatedly and starts again and stops. And the person who trains intelligently will probably have a better physique as well. So we're getting down to the end here. This is number 8. And it says that we perform the wrong exercises or we perform the right ones, only incorrectly. So not every exercise ages well for every person. And by that I mean that some movements create enormous joint stress while providing relatively little additional benefit, whereas others are extremely effective but become dangerous when performed with poor mechanics, fatigue, get this one, ego loading, or lack of body awareness. Aging increases the importance of exercise selection because orthopedic history, balance, spinal tolerance, mobility restrictions, and neurological changes such as neuropathy in the legs all influence safety and effectiveness. A poorly performed squat may irritate knees or the lower back unnecessarily. An excessively deep pressing angle may aggravate aging shoulders. Poor posture during pulling exercises may overload vulnerable spinal structures. However, this does not mean that older adults should avoid challenging movements entirely. It just means movement quality becomes critically important. Often, small modifications in stance, grip, range of motion, machine choice, such as the Smith machine, or loading pattern dramatically improve joint tolerance while preserving muscular stimulation. And I would add that this is where a fitness coach, strength training coach, becomes very valuable in an older person's training activities. And now we're at number 9, and I'm sure some of you were waiting for this one. And it has to do with failing to cool down properly at the end of the workout. Many people think that the workout ends when the final repetition of the final set of the final exercise is completed. Biologically, however, the body is still transitioning out of an activated stress state. The heart rate remains elevated for some time, circulation patterns are altered, muscle tone remains high, the respiration or breathing rate is still elevated, and the nervous system may still be in a heightened sympathetic fight or flight condition. And older adults often benefit from a deliberate cool-down period involving slower movement, breathing normalization, gentle stretching, posture restoration, and gradual reduction of nervous system activation. And this transition phase may help reduce excessive stiffness, improve mobility, encourage circulation, and support parasympathetic recovery. Stretching itself should not be violent or forced. The objective is restoration of movement quality, not painful flexibility contests. Recovery practices are especially important later in life because unresolved tightness or fatigue or nervous system tension may accumulate progressively across sessions. And now the last one, number 10, and I want to ask, would you have anticipated this in the top 10 list? I hope so, because it's so critical. You fail to support your training with adequate sleep, nutrition, hydration, and rest days. So let's discuss this briefly. Perhaps the single greatest misunderstanding in strength training is the belief that muscle is built during the workout itself. Well, the workout is actually the stimulus phase. Adaptation, however, occurs afterward, and that means the growth. During recovery, the body repairs tissue, synthesizes proteins, restores glycogen, regulates inflammation, rebuilds nervous system readiness, and adapts metabolically. Older adults often underestimate how strongly sleep quality, protein intake, hydration, caloric adequacy, and true recovery days influence these processes. Poor sleep, for instance, impairs hormone regulation, nervous system recovery, glucose handling, and muscle protein synthesis. Inadequate protein intake limits rebuilding capacity. Chronic dehydration affects circulation and performance and recovery, and excessive calorie restriction may weaken adaptation and accelerate frailty. Rest days are not wasted days. They are biologically necessary, and they are integration periods during which the body transforms training stress into improved capability. And rest days are truly meant to be rest days. They are days when you do not go into the gym, no matter how much you are tempted. Perhaps I should end the presentation after these top 10, as the title would indicate, but I've got 3 bonus tips that I just want to share with you, if you don't mind, before we close out. And the first one has to do with stretching. One of the most common mistakes, in fact, that older adults make is failing to understand that different forms of stretching serve different biological purposes. And what is called dynamic stretching and static stretching are not interchangeable. Each belongs at a different point in the workout because the body's physiological needs change before versus after you train. So first, dynamic stretching. This should be performed before lifting because its purpose is to prepare the body for the workout ahead. And dynamic movements involve controlled motion. They are not motionless. Controlled motion through range of motion rather than prolonged holding positions. So if you see someone raising their arm up and holding it out, that is not a dynamic stretch. If their arm was moving up and down as they reached, that would be dynamic because of the motion. So arm circles are what we do, leg swings, torso rotations, controlled marching, body weight squats, shoulder mobility drills, and gentle movement patterns. These are all examples of a dynamic stretch, and they gradually increase tissue temperature, circulation, joint lubrication, and nervous system activation. These movements also help rehearse the movement patterns that will soon be added or loaded during the exercise itself. In other words, adults, especially, dynamic warm-up activity is serving as a wake-up to the neurological recruitment systems and helps improve coordination, balance, posture, and movement confidence before heavier loading begins. On the other hand, static stretching involves holding a muscle in an elongated position for a sustained period of time. And this type of stretching is usually better suited for the end of the workout because the tissues are already warm, more pliable, and they've been worked. After training, the static stretch may help reduce excessive muscular tightness. And I always want my clients to walk out of the gym feeling loose and light on their feet. Improve relaxation, restored movement quality, encourage parasympathetic recovery, and gradually maintaining functional flexibility over time. These are all benefits of static stretching. The objective here is not to force the body into painful positions, by the way, but to gently restore length and mobility after loading. So the differences matter because the nervous system responds differently depending on timing. If you do perform aggressive static stretching before lifting, this may temporarily reduce the amount of force you can produce and also wreak havoc with joint stability and muscular responsiveness because the nervous system becomes more relaxed at precisely the time it should be becoming activated. So that's a mismatch. That's a no-no. Dynamic stretching before training, however, supports readiness and activation. Static stretching afterward will support recovery and restoration. So that's the proper sequence. Now, omitting these phases altogether in your workout session may increase injury risk, particularly as you get older. Entering loaded exercise with stiff joints, cold connective tissue, poor circulation, and unprepared movement patterns is going to increase the likelihood of strains, irritation, imbalance, and poor mechanics. And let's face it, injury likelihood. Likewise, abruptly ending intense training without proper cool down and mobility restoration may contribute to lingering tightness. And you see these fellas, they have an intense workout, they don't stretch and cool down after, and they're walking out of the gym very tight. And it looks like they're in pain and can barely move their legs. Excessive soreness is also a reality here, reduced movement quality, and cumulative joint stress over time. So stretching, when applied properly, is not merely flexibility work, like you might have thought. It is part of intelligent movement preparation and, as we've been calling it, recovery biology. Now, bonus tip number 2 has to do with breathing properly during your workout session. And many men and women that I've seen in the gym do not know the proper breathing technique at all. And it's certainly important, far more important really than most people realize. As we say so often, especially for older adults, many individuals either hold their breath unconsciously, which is terrible to do, because you'll potentially create an adverse cardiovascular event, or they breathe randomly without awareness, or move so quickly that breathing patterns become chaotic and disconnected from the exercise itself. We have to make the connection between our movement during the exercise and the breathing cadence and timing that supports those movements. So proper breathing improves safety, movement control, nervous system focus, pacing, posture, and force production. You didn't know that, did you? A lot of people fail to realize these important factors about breathing. It's not just taking in oxygen. Now, in most resistance exercises, the exhale, when you breathe out, should occur during the strenuous phase of the lift. Typically, that's the pushing phase or the pulling or the lifting position, known as the concentric phase. This is the phase during which the muscle is actively shortening while overcoming whatever the resistance load is that you're applying. And the inhale usually occurs during the return to the starting position, or the eccentric phase, when the muscle lengthens under control as the weight, for instance, is perhaps lowered. Now, the breathing pattern helps stabilize the torso. It also coordinates muscular effort, reduces unnecessary internal pressure spikes as well. And proper exhalation, breathing out, during exertion may also help prevent excessive blood pressure elevation that I indicated. It can occur when older adults strain while holding their breath. That's why you never want to hold your breath as you're working out. Many individuals unknowingly perform a partial Valsalva maneuver. Have you heard of that? Forcefully holding the breath during exertion. That's not good at all. It can produce dizziness, lightheadedness, or excessive cardiovascular strain if done properly. You see these people getting ready to bench press a ridiculous amount of weight, and they're holding their breath. Every vein is popping. Their face is as red as an apple. I mean, that's just not something we want to do. Proper breathing also serves another critically important function. It forces conscious engagement with the movement itself and you can actually get more out of your movements, out of your workout reps, if your breathing is correct and consistent and in tune, in line with your movement patterns. Breathing correctly slows the pace naturally because the lifter, you, must coordinate respiration with muscular action. So that's a good thing. It creates better cadence, improved body awareness, which is really good, and greater control over posture and your form, your technique, all good. Many exercise injuries occur not simply because a movement was too difficult, but because it was rushed mindlessly with poor breathing and poor control. So in many ways, proper breathing acts almost like a neurological metronome. Did you ever think of it that way? It regulates tempo, maintains concentration, improves movement quality, and keeps the nervous system actively engaged in the exercise rather than simply going through the motions. Now, sometimes clients want to be talking all the time throughout their workout, and that's not advisable. For one thing, their breathing is going to suffer. They're not going to have the right cadence, and they're not going to be able to go through each repetition properly. So older adults, on the other hand, who will learn proper breathing technique often report feeling stronger, more stable, less rushed, and more connected to their movements during training. And I can't emphasize enough how valuable that last part is, feeling connected to their movements during training. Then it no longer is a mindless activity where you just show up to a gym and move the weights around. No. It's a concerted effort where your mind is engaged, your breathing, everything comes together. Now here's my third and final bonus tip, and it is that you think strength training is only for former athletes or, jocks or gym people. And it's one of the greatest misconceptions surrounding strength training. It exists primarily for these former bodybuilders or older men trying to relive their glory days of youth. Well, many older adults, especially those who never identified as fitness people, mistakenly view strength training as cosmetic, ego-driven, or unnecessary for normal aging, something that's related to vanity, as we said earlier. But in reality, properly designed strength training may be one of the most important interventions available for preserving physical capability, independence, metabolic health, neurological function, and quality of life later as we age. And strength training is fundamentally about capacity building. Think of it. Capacity means reserve ability, the physical margin that allows a person to meet the demands of daily life safely and confidently, no matter how steep those demands may be on a given day. Carrying groceries, climbing stairs, rising from a chair or the floor, recovering from a stumble, lifting objects overhead, walking long distances without huffing and puffing and having to stop, maintaining good posture throughout the day as you move, as you sit, as you work, and reacting quickly during instability. All of these depend heavily upon muscular strength and a nervous system that is stable and able to function properly. The tragedy is that many people do not realize how important these capacities are until they begin losing them, and lose them we will if we're not careful. Strength training, though, is going to help preserve the biological reserve necessary to remain functional and independent when you're 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, and so on. One of the most important benefits of strength training in older adults that I'd like to mention and highlight is fall prevention. Falls are not merely accidents. I've experienced 2 that were accidents, and those are no picnic, let me tell you. But They're often manifestations of declining muscle mass, or reduced reaction speed, or impaired coordination, or weakened type 2 muscle fibers, slower nervous system recruitment, or diminished balance confidence. And I can tell you that after having a fall and breaking bones and having to heal and go through rehab, your confidence is diminished because you're not able to move initially as you did before the accident. And it takes time to go through rehab and build up that confidence, and strength is a huge component of it. Strength training helps address many of the factors that I just mentioned simultaneously. That makes it really wonderful. Stronger legs improve your gait stability and your stair climbing ability. Improved hip and core strength enhance posture and balance correction. And a better nervous system recruitment improves the ability to react rapidly during unexpected movement disturbances such as I experienced. But even so, I went down, and it was a bit of a long haul to recover. And in many cases, but I did. The difference between a harmless stumble and a devastating fall is not luck, it's physical reserve capacity. So let's talk about strength training exerting profound effects on metabolism and body composition. You bet. Aging is often accompanied by sarcopenia, the loss of muscle tissue, but also muscle functioning. And that contributes to overall weakness, metabolic slowdown, insulin resistance, frailty, and declining function overall. Muscle, we have to remember, is metabolically active tissue. It's not passive. Preserving it, then, is going to help support glucose regulation, as well as energy expenditure, as well as mitochondrial health, and overall metabolic flexibility. Older adults who do engage in strength training consistently and frequently maintain healthier body composition, better blood sugar control, have better blood pressure readings, and greater energy levels than their sedentary counterparts of the same age. The nervous system benefits that we don't usually think about are equally important, yet frequently overlooked, as I'm saying. Strength training is not merely muscular activity, it is neurological activity. Every lift requires the brain to recruit motor units, coordinate movement, stabilize posture, and organize force production. Properly designed training stimulates neuroplasticity, improves motor coordination, enhances reaction capability, and may help preserve cognitive function through increased blood flow, neurochemical signaling, and neurological engagement. Did you know all those things? So in many ways, strength training acts as a stimulation for not only the body, but also the brain. Psychologically, there is a benefit to strength training as well. It often restores confidence and self-efficacy. And believe me, when you're older, these are huge. Many older adults gradually internalize the belief that physical decline is inevitable and irreversible. But this is not true. However, as their strength diminishes, these kinds of people often become more fearful, more hesitant, more sedentary, and physically withdrawn, and it's a downhill spiral. But successful strength training challenges this narrative directly. The individual begins experiencing capability again. They feel stronger when they stand up. They feel more capable walking and carrying objects, moving through space, and participating in life in general. And gradually the body begins feeling trustworthy again. It's a great feeling. Strength training may also support bone health by exposing the skeleton to mechanical loading forces that stimulate bone maintenance. This becomes increasingly important because aging adults are vulnerable to declining bone density and fracture risk. So the body adapts to load when load is progressive and applied intelligently and consistently. Perhaps most importantly, strength training changes the trajectory of aging itself. Many people assume aging automatically means becoming weaker, more dependent, and experiencing overall physical decline. While biology certainly does change with age, inactivity accelerates nearly every negative aspect of that process. Now, strength training, on the other hand, can act as a biological signal that tells the body some very key important things. Remain capable, preserve tissue, maintain function, stay responsive, and continue adapting. So the goal here is not vanity, it is preserving humanity's most important physical gift, and that is the ability to move confidently through life with strength, independence, and resilience. So that's it. We've made it to the finish line. One of the most important ideas that I hope you take away is that successful aging does not occur by accident. The body responds to the choices we make repeatedly regarding movement, recovery, nutrition, consistency, and lifestyle. Aging may change the rules of training, but the body still retains a remarkable ability to adapt when we challenge it appropriately. So train wisely, and this means respecting recovery biology as we've outlined it, selecting exercises intelligently, using proper technique, and understanding that more is not always better. The goal is not punishment or ego-driven exercise, but meaningful stimulation that the body can successfully recover from and adapt to over time. Recover intelligently as well. Recovery is not separate from training, it is part of training. Sleep, hydration, nutrition, mobility work, stress management, and true rest days all help transform exercise stress into improved capability and resilience. Without recovery, even good training programs eventually fail. And most importantly, preserve your capability. Strength training later in life is ultimately about maintaining independence, movement confidence, balance, reaction ability, and the physical reserve necessary to continue participating fully in life. The objective is not simply to live longer, but to remain stronger, more functional, and more resilient throughout those years. Thank you again for joining me on this presentation and for your participation in terms of engagement of thought. And this is Dr. Pete saying I wish you all the best. Bye-bye until next time.